that's really helpful, Tiffany. I think that's gonna maybe even get us a little bit into the misconceptions conversation. And I see that we've got, maybe a few people that have joined us. So in the chat, I'm sharing just once again some quick links so you can get access right now to our guidance document that we're going to refer to throughout the conversation, and the slides right there in the chat box. So make sure you visit that. But Tiffany, I think just the first thing that comes to mind on question 3 about misconceptions is exactly what you said, is that I think a lot of times when folks ask us what kinds of flexibilities they are after, like if they have an idea in mind, I would say very often my response or somebody's response is, you can probably already do that. And we can provide a lot of support for people if you're trying to think of what you are processing is like maybe a little outside of the box. It may be well within inside what's possible in the law. We're going to ask a couple questions though, and it's always going to be what's best for the kids. And so it's both, is it allowed, and is it something that's good for the kids? And just because it's allowed doesn't mean it's good for the kids. So we're going to help you think about those things as well if you have that conversation with any of us. But I wonder what other misconceptions come up. I mean, that's the main one that hits me, is people think they're boxed in too rigidly when actually there's some flexibility. What other misconceptions stand out to the two of you?
Yeah, so I think specifically back to a couple of asks previously for courses that might, let's say they were science-based courses or engineering-based courses, and they were related to a specific field of science or a specific area of engineering. So for example, I think we've had a question before about can aviation count for a science course? And one of the things we look at when we consider that is, what does that aviation course involve? Does it really cover, let's say, all of the physics standards? Well, then you should probably code it as physics, but use the context of aviation as the draw to bring kids in or to get them engaged. But you always want to think about, if you're asking for a course, and will it count for some of those graduation requirements for mathematics, science, English, and social studies. First, think about the standards that we have already for those courses. And does your course that you're looking at cover those standards? Well, then we should probably just call it that. And the other sort of part of that storyline is, we work really hard with higher regions, especially with the college career work ready pathway, to ensure that the courses that students are taking in high school truly does prepare them for college. So one of the things we know for science is that when students go to college, whether they pursue a STEM career or science career or not, they still are required to take basic life science and basic physical science classes. So we want to make sure in their high school years, they have the proper building blocks to get there. So if you are offering, again, let's say an aviation class that might be more about the history of aviation, then you can see that that probably is not going to prepare students for the science that they'll be required to take in college. So, those are just some things a specific example where we walk through some questions to really figure out what the intent of a course might be if schools are trying to see if it fits for a graduation requirement, or if it should be a new option for a graduation requirement.
I think that issue about context versus content is such an important distinction, and I think that's one thing I think people can really think creatively about as far as misconceptions. Actually, there's a lot of flexibility in the context of the course, and you can still go on and work on content that we already have in place. Peter, do you want to follow up with any misconceptions?
Well, actually, it kind of goes into what this question that we have is, that you have to offer a certain sequence of courses, and that we recommend the pathway. So you have the college prep and the core. So one question that we get is that if students on the core, that they don't think they can go to college, that they can meet the college prep requirements. Well, they actually, just because they sign up for the core pathway doesn't mean in the end that they won't meet those. And so that they think they're stuck in a pathway. And so it's not designed to have students be stuck on a certain path. And that the graduation requirements are not just from the K-12 perspective, that we do work with our CTE partners and our Regents partners, because it's about matriculation. It's about leaving high school and being prepared for the next thing. And so there was a question in here about math and finance and considered above Algebra 1. And it's not, but there are flexibilities within math within the core framework. And so they don't have to have Algebra 2 or trig or something else that is above Algebra 1. You look at those options for that student, like if they're in career tech, they can use a 3-hour career tech program to count as not a math, but it is actually, it'll meet their third math requirement. And we have the wording that says that for transcript guidance. But if your district, another thing is they say we only have to offer these courses at your district, you can recommend to your district that you change courses and just have the district adopt new courses. Because staffing changes, certifications change. A lot of times you get in a school and think that's all we offer. Well, you need to get other courses approved as long as you'll have teachers certified to do that. And I would definitely contact curriculum and instruction about, how this teacher is certified in this, can we teach this course? And that's really an important point because our students are so migrant. I mean, they change districts all the time. And if the student had anatomy phys at this school and they go to another school and they don't offer that, what do? We get those kind of questions as well. So it's always best to be changing your, looking at your graduation requirements, updating them accordingly, so that you can meet student needs.
Yeah, and we do have a couple of questions in the chat box. So Levi, you mind going ahead and addressing those?
Yeah. Well, I'll clarify one thing that Peter said because it's so important for us to always say. So the question about math and finance. So is it at or above Algebra 1? The answer is simply yes, but you got to remember that is not applicable for college graduation or for college admissions. So it doesn't, even though it is at or above Algebra 1, and you can look at competencies that we have on our website for that. It may not apply for both tracks because it's not approved for college admissions. So you got to always kind of balance the question. It's kind of like the question needs as much context as possible. Is math and finance eligible for a certain pathway? And we would always follow up with questions. Is this student planning to go to college? Are they on the college preparation work ready? Do they have they met the 3 requirements in high school? There are all sorts of qualifications that help us give you the right information. On questions like that, I'd again always follow up with somebody like Petra or our director of secondary mathematics, and we can help guide you through that. And so that's Sherry's point. So that point that you're making applies to a core track. You're looking for students who are not able to meet the college admissions requirements. Then you may need to think about an opt-out pathway for them. And I hope that's a little bit helpful. There's also a question about how the competencies are measured. And I think there's a short version of this that I love kind of prompting people to think about. As a local control state, you have a real opportunity to establish local competencies for courses that do not have state standards. And inside of your approved courses and your approved competencies, at a board level policy, you should have an understanding of what in that course will be mastered before the student gets credit. And I think that's just a part, if we just talk about misconceptions, Petra, would you agree? One of the misconceptions that we hear a lot is that people do not necessarily have their courses approved by their board and in place with approved local competencies.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, there's a lot here. So I want to make sure that we get to some, there are so many meaty things that we need to talk about. So that last point is a good transition that may let us skip over question 4 a little bit. If you want to make sure that you're meeting compliance, there are a lot of things you can do. But I say at the top of that list is you should have a local policy. And that local policy should be reviewed and approved to match the state requirements. And if you have questions, you can reach out to us and we will help you get that policy right. But it should not be, I think the worst case scenario is that it's a little bit sporadic and not consistently applied to all of your students. So you want a consistent board approved policy for all of your graduation requirements. Peter, do you need to clean up anything I said about the board policy?
No, have a board policy.
Yeah, have a board policy. I mean, really, have a board policy.
Trying to make sure that you're reviewing that and
yeah. The most difficult situations that we've encountered for me include not having a board policy and therefore not applying certain graduation requirements consistently with student groups, and therefore having those inconsistencies that lead to gaps so that students are actually not ready to graduate on time. And we absolutely do not want that to occur.
Right. And then I will put here, make sure that you're keeping a list of your students um, who do opt for the core pathway, because
Mhm.
that is something that's checked in accreditation.
Mhm.
They ask, and we want that information. So make sure that you have those signed forms somewhere where you can easily access them.
That's right. That's right. Great. Okay. Now that one you should follow up with us. If you need more support about how to get those kinds of documents organized and prepared, let us help you. There are I kind of want to transition away from the basics to the waivers and the like some real kind of key flexibilities. Now this one, there's a lot here that we could explore. And so Petra, have you done your other session where you're going to talk about a couple examples of this?
No, it's right after this one at 12:30.
Okay, so right after this session, Petra has a wonderful other session that's going to dive into a couple of these examples, but I want to make sure so that we can kind of move through this one as well. If you're wondering what waivers exist inside of our flexibilities document that's been provided in the chat, way at the bottom are some summaries of some specific waivers that can be granted to schools for graduation requirements. We provided a link directly to the administrative rules that help structure those waivers, and we would love to make sure that you look at those, especially for when you have students transferring into your district at the end of their junior year or after. Okay, so those are some real critical flexibilities that you'll want to know about, especially for transfer students. Now, this one I'd like to spend just a moment more on, because we get this question so many versions of this question. When can students take courses in middle school to meet their high school graduation requirements, and when can students skip courses?
That's where we're starting. Can anybody jump in? Is that where
Yeah, Levi, I think you're probably the best to lead this because we get we get a lot of the math questions related to this, and probably fine arts comes up quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just highlight some of the most important things. Remember how I told you that if you ask us some questions about flexibility, we're going to answer with like two major filters. Is it allowed? And is it best for kids?
Right.
So there is some information here that I'm about to share with you that talks about how it's allowed, but it may not be best for all kids. So let's put that out there first. So firstly, as it relates to mathematics, students are explicitly required to take their mathematics credits. There are 3 mathematics credits between the grades of 9 and 12. There is no way to get kids to take fewer than 3 math credits in their high school years. You may change the math credits they take, but they have to take those 3. I mean, they have to take at least 3 between grades 9 and 12. In general, students can access high school content in middle school, but we would recommend the specific application of course compression, skipping, or placement that is outlined in our credit by examination or credit by competency requirements that are in our proficiency-based promotion rules. Now, there's so much there. There's so much. Let me just hop to this section. So we tried to make sure that you can see inside of our guidance document that the proficiency-based promotion structure is exactly the right structure to think about how kids can get into high school coursework early. If you are skipping students out of some middle school band courses and just putting them in high school band, for example, you may be missing some important opportunities for those kids to have a progression that prepares them for real, true proficiency in their band course in high school. So you always want to be thinking about this. Have the students compressed their work? Have they been promoted because they demonstrated proficiency? Have been promoted into an advanced course? Those are decisions that you'll want to be making as you think about courses that can be offered in middle. We have even shown that students who are taking advanced math courses in middle school who do not show proficiency across all domains of their middle school math actually are scoring lower in some of these areas on state assessments, like spatial reasoning and geometry and data and statistics. So it's really important when you make those decisions that students are, if they skip, it is because they have demonstrated proficiency already in that course.
Right. And I'll just add that, again, we have worked really hard with hundreds of teachers in the state over the last several years to develop academic standards, especially in those middle school grades, that lead to true progressions or building blocks for high school expectations. And so I think that what Levi is sharing here is very, very important. We, in the science realm, for example, we do have a lot of students who are taking physical science, let's say at 8th grade. But what we really recommend is if those students are taking physical science in 8th grade to receive a high school credit, that the 8th grade science standards should also be incorporated into their learning during that year, because there are a slew of what we call life science concepts in those 8th grade standards that are true building blocks for high school biology. And if students miss out on those, it's going to be much more difficult for them to be proficient in their high school biology course. So compression, where you combine competencies from different courses into one course, or the proficiency-based promotion are really things to pay attention to, making sure students have those building blocks or can show proficiency in those building blocks. Otherwise, we'll continue to see the gaps in high school and beyond in college, because students will not have had access to that first learning experience or to show proficiency. And then we just don't know that they've gained it or not by skipping without those things in place.
And as far as graduation, I totally would advise schools against just blanket enrolling students like in 8th grade just because they're smart or you think they have the aptitude or whatever, or even in 7th grade. And that includes the English courses and whatever other courses you need to look at. And I think ICAP is going to help us with this. What does that student intend to do and how do they do that? Because the question that I get, and I'll tell you, it's mostly from parents who are frustrated because now their child is being forced, they think, to take the higher math. Well, they did well in middle school. And now they then truly understand that, okay, well, you took Algebra 1 and geometry in middle school, that means you're on a math pathway. And then they don't want them to take the higher math, or the student is not doing well in Algebra 2 in 9th grade. And so what do you do about those other 3 years of math that they have to have in grades 9 through 12? And so it's about advising and about letting parents know, well, what do you intend to do? Because if I want to be a journalist, your child wants to be a journalism major, why are you making them take all of that heavy load of math and they've struggled right after Algebra 1? And so consider the students' plans. Or they want to go to college, what's their career goals when you're talking about enrolling them in those courses.
Yep. Yeah. My summary is doing really great in a given course is not a good enough reason to skip the next course. So you want to think about it as an issue about advising and demonstrating competency for the courses that you do skip.
And use competencies and not just grades alone. So use a combination of measures to see, because we know grades can be their teacher and worksheets. You just never know about all that. So use a combination of measures.
Yeah, that actually raises a whole other point about grading that we probably don't have time to get into. But if you in your district, I think it is important to be thinking about how grades are reflective of students' content knowledge. We have a lot of situations where grades are inclusive of students' discipline or organization skills, and that is something that we want to pay attention to. Is if students are getting credit or not credit for showing up to school, for example, we may be actually accidentally or unintentionally causing harm to their transcript because of other life issues that they may be facing. So you want to always find a balance. Grades should reflect a student's real knowledge and content mastery of the course. Let's hop to a few other little things here. We're going to transition to the focus on innovations. So we've kind of talked about the basics. We've talked about some of the existing flexibilities. So I just want to revisit one simple question about innovations here, which is When there are options for meeting requirements, like maybe the student can take different courses, they can choose between computer education or world languages, or maybe they're choosing between speech and fine arts, or maybe they're choosing which math pathway they're going to take. What information should we really use to help make those decisions?
Well, I think Petra would probably say that the new wonderful structure and tool with ICAP is the way to go, right, Petra?
I would say that, and not to limit it. I would say things like this. Think about how a student can meet those requirements through something else. And so when you're planning and you know a student is going to need the math and they're going to go into the biomedical program, that's somewhere where you don't have to schedule them because they're going to meet those. So you need to be aware of what those programs are and what other academic credit students can get through some of the career tech programs, or if they're going to plan out to not take English 4, but they're going to take Comp 1, Comp 2, and concurrent. So use those types of things to make sure that they meet the graduation requirements. Don't just lock them in again to, your specific courses and say, this is what we have, but be innovative in how students can meet those requirements.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think, you will know your students best when you're meeting with them. I mean, you or your teachers when you're discussing course options or with their families. But there are a couple of things that I have found very rewarding in listening to some of our curriculum directors talk about some of their courses and their subject areas. So I want to go back to the idea of world languages or computer sciences. And one of the things I've really enjoyed from our world languages director, Dr. Kathleen Skinner, is that she has really worked with business and industry in the state to really have a better understanding of how they value students who have some level of proficiency in a second language and how attractive that makes a high school for a high school or college graduate who has that level of proficiency. We also know that in world languages, for example, as a student is learning a second language, they're also practicing critical thinking because they're constantly transitioning between two languages, and it's a wonderful skill set to have. We know that in computer science, there are some skills available for critical thinking and problem solving there, but really, I think talking to your students about the courses that you have available that meet those requirements. And of course, part of the reason they'll take some of these courses is because they're interested and it fits their pathway for ICAP. But we are going to try to do a good job in the next couple of years in our office to really explain some of these courses a little better and what can be possible with them, what the courses could entail. And Levi, maybe you want to talk about that just a little bit, what's on the horizon.
Yeah, well, not only is it on the horizon that we're going to provide more guidance that may help you with your own local course catalogs, and that would entail course descriptions, clarifications about appropriate certifications and prerequisites, for example. But we're also trying to really help school districts understand how they can create new course codes themselves that may end up available to all students in the state. So when we have as we strengthen kind of the subject code list, which is right now just got a course code number and a course name, as that thing grows and has course descriptions, we hope that folks like you all who are interested in getting this right and thinking about options for your students, if you find gaps and maybe opportunities for new courses, we want you to have a pathway, a really clearly defined pathway to propose those new courses. So
I think those are great. And Tiffany is a great example with the world languages and computers. So as a bilingual person and a former computer and Spanish teacher, talking with students about the necessity for both of those, but in your career field, when do you choose which road to take? And as a high school counselor, that's what they was like, well, should I take two of these, and two world language or two computers? And it's like, well, what do you want to do? Which one of those pathways is going to, enhance your opportunity to get a job? Because you can get certifications through some of your career computer programs. There's a question about high school credits. The credit should be awarded if the course was taught by a certified teacher, even in middle school. They should get, and it was intended to be a high school course under the high school course code, it should be awarded credit. the year that they took it. So it's not like, oh, you figured that that school needed to award the credit and you would put that on the transcript, that's where they earned it. All of my children took about 6 middle school courses. They went to Northeast Academy, and all of those, they had them posted already before they went to ninth grade.
But they go on their high school transcript as well.
Yes, because it would be an
they-
official
Mhm.
transcripted grade shown earned at XYZ middle school in 7th grade and 8th grade, and it should roll over to their high school transcript.
And the opposite here is if they do poorly in a course that is meant to be a high school course, it cannot just be withheld necessarily. It is a high school course. So
It
it
is
needs to
a
be,
high school course.
they need to be documented as a high school course wherever they're occurring. And then you can, then there are other kind of situations that we could address, but students don't get kind of a free chance at a high school course just to see if they can pass it.
No, but there is I did check with legal that they can retake. Some people say once you take it, you can't retake it.
Oh, yeah.
You can retake it, but you can't earn a core credit for it again.
So what that means, just to clarify what Peter's saying, is if you got to get 3 math credits in high school and you took algebra 1 in 8th grade, you can't take algebra 1 maybe that's a bad example. Let's do just in high school. Let's say that you took algebra 1 in 9th grade and you made a grade you didn't want, and you took algebra 1 again in 10th grade to make a better grade. That doesn't count as 2 math credits.
Right. One of them is an elective and one is a math.
One's an elective, and it just is helping your overall grade for that course.
It basically becomes like a pre-algebra, which is
unfortunately.
Okay. We have about 5 minutes.
So fast. Okay, let's hit just a couple of quick things then. Question 8, I'm going to simplify. You all are about to get access to a really cool document. Now, it's listed in our flexibility guidance that we've shared with you from the beginning and throughout the discussion in the chat box. But we have draft guidance for how districts can go about creating new courses. And you can see how detailed the process is and how all sorts of parties are involved. But you should know, because we get questions about new courses all the time, it's about an 18-month process from the time you show us your plan for a new course to the time when it's available to everybody in the state, about 18 months. So if that's something that's happening for you locally and you're thinking you want to make a new course, please make sure you have access to this guidance document and the guidance around developing a new course. It is a time-consuming process. I think the last question here, I just want to make sure, sorry, there's a comment. You can count Algebra 1 twice if the student takes it over in high school as an elective. Yes, it would have to fill an elective spot, Charles. But it wouldn't be able to count as another math if it was a second attempt. There are 2 last questions. There's a question about doing problem-based or thematic. So I just want to say, Oklahoma is one of the few states in the country that has for a long time explicitly allowed for competency-based credit rather than Carnegie-based credit, which means if you have properly certified teachers and you're doing the content that is addressed by the standards of the competencies that are locally approved, you can actually integrate and do thematic problem-based courses right now. So that is an option right now. There's existing flexibility for that.
Can you give a quick example of that, Levi?
A quick example maybe if let's say that I think we had heard like Mustang was doing this, Mustang High School. They were doing an option where they were doing, I think it was calculus and physics, but it might have been trig and physics, and now I don't recall, where they were essentially combining the courses and allowing those students to take those 2 credits together. And I think that's just a simple example.
Right.
The last one that we get, and I just want to make sure, it's just to reiterate, and we had a question come specifically about this. So just remember, if you want to make sure that the courses are really preparing kids for their futures, you sometimes have to make difficult decisions, but it should be made by referring back to their ICAP. So oftentimes we have sometimes kids can't fit in the courses that they need for their future because they're trying to make time for a lot of extra sports courses, and sometimes difficult decisions have to be made at a local level if that time doesn't allow for those kinds of courses. But we also had a question here. Peter, can you respond to the question that I texted you a minute ago?
Oh, let me check my. Okay. There's my alarm about work-based learning.
Mm-hmm. Can we get clarification on the work-based learning element? Is there another session that could address that?
Chelsea Hunt is actually doing a session, but I think it's like right now. But I
Okay.
would definitely go back and watch her session. So I'm trying to find where you had it. Work-based learning is only, students only have to have one opportunity in high school. So as part of ICAP, the biggest question that we get about work-based learning opportunities is, what do the students have to have? So some of the elements of ICAP are yearly, like doing their assessments and checking their coursework, like what we're talking about right now. But their work-based learning experiences, students only have to have one experience between grades 9 through 12. So if a student does an internship in 11th grade, they're done. If they do some job shadowing or other things that qualify for that in 10th grade, which they could do some of that through their pre-engineering program even, then they're finished. It doesn't mean that that's all they can do, but it does mean that you can count that experience. So the question was, can we get clarification on the work-based learning element of ICAP? And in a nutshell, that's what it is. And we do have guidance on the OK Edge website that has examples of what those opportunities are.
Yeah, and I see that last question that just came in the chat box, and I know we have to go, but yes to the question about, do we consult with OK Promise? So in the guidance document, Levi will put it in the chat, I'm sure, again, in the guidance document that outlines the process we use to approve new course codes, we do work with higher regents to make sure the course fits within college admissions requirements, and that includes conversations related to Oklahoma's promise.
But
So
it is
I'll be
just,
going over that in my session.
all right.
all right,
I'll
thanks.
talk a bit
Thanks,
about
Deidre.
that.
Great. We do, and yes, Tiffany's right, but we do tend to recommend not to include publishers on transcripts. So if Career Tech has it in their course codes, you can refer to it, but you want to refer to it as it is in the actual course code document. We don't need to know the publisher of the course.
Right.
So that tends to be our guidance. If you want to do that, you may, but we don't really need to know the publisher of the course.
Great. And I believe there's another session right after us, so we're going to have to hop off, but please let us know if you have additional questions, and we'd be happy to help out.
And these, this presentation and that document will be available after this session. So you can go back to this particular session and have access to those documents. And again, our contact information has been provided. You can find us. We're always here to help answer your questions. Really appreciate you, Tiffany and Levi, for providing this session and having the forethought to have this discussion with schools. We really appreciate you. You guys have a great day. And thank you for joining us.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Bye. Ooh, wait.
Thanks, Charles.